Hello, everyone. My name is Edith, also known as the Lady E, and welcome to the Lady E Effect podcast. We have a guest today. I'm super excited about today's episode. We're going to have a lot of great things to talk about today. So, we're going to go ahead and get right into it. So, please let us know who you are and tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Emmanuel Kakulu, better known as Manny. A few different things at this point in my life. But yeah, Emmanuel Kakulu, Nigerian-American from Boston. Been out here in the DC, DMV area for, what is it now, 12, 13 years, something like that. Lincoln University graduate. I teach, I coach. My life's work is about the youth, particularly young Black youth. I kind of leave it at that. Let the rest of the conversation take.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. As you shared, there's a lot that you're doing. And here at the Lady E Effect, we're really passionate about those that really take the time to contribute to the community. So, have some questions for you today, have some topics that I'm sure the audience is looking forward to hear your insight on. So, first and foremost, we have to start with the youth. I love the fact that you really dedicate your time through teaching and coaching in terms of the youth. So, my first question is actually that with you having the practicing and the expertise in the spaces of teaching and coaching, what would you say in terms of the youth would be the difference of how you would articulate coaching the youth versus teaching the youth?
That's a really good question. To be honest, in my opinion, there's no difference. In order to be a good coach, you have to be a good teacher. In order to be a good teacher, you have to be a good coach. That's my opinion. And the experience has really taught me that teaching was never something that I saw myself doing or aspired to do. I kind of fell into the profession, so to say. It was more so God's plan than mine. At the exact same time, coaching was not something I ever aspired to do either. You know what I mean? I dedicated myself and my life to the game, but that was always as a player. Both professions kind of literally I just stumbled upon, to be honest, but it didn't take long for me to realize that, like, oh, okay, this is what I'm actually supposed to be doing. I look at it, I don't teach for the love of teaching. I teach because of what it affords me, the opportunity that it affords me to reach our children in mass, and to be able to spend a grand amount of time with them on a daily basis. Not so that I can, tell them what to think or how to think, but just to be able to impact them in a positive way and really just be the person that I wish I had. You know what I mean? At that age. I think that any of us in whatever we're doing, if we have the opportunity to just do that, be the person that you wish you had at a specific age, if you can do that for a young person or for multiple young people, in my opinion, you're doing God's work. You know what I'm saying? So that's really what it is to me. But I don't. They both help me. Coaching helps me teach, teaching helps me coach. But I've realized that they're kind of one and the same. You're an educator. If you're a coach, especially a good one, you're an educator. And unfortunately, not all teachers are always educating. I'll just put it that way. I'm not going to say that not all teachers are educators, but not all teachers are always educating. Not all coaches are always doing it either. But in order to be a good coach, you have to teach. In order to be a good teacher, you have to coach.
I agree. You said it spot on. Teaching is powerful, coaching is powerful. They both have a major impact on anyone's lives, especially the life of the youth. With all of the crazy things that life in this world has a way of exposing itself to the youth at any given age. It could be a single digit age, it could be, early teen years, it could be, late teens. Teaching and coaching is very life-changing, to say the least. So I do appreciate you sharing that, because especially here in the DMV, there's a lot of teachers. Shout out to the amazing teachers and coaches that are out there, the men and the women that are daily dedicating their lives to really contribute to the youth. The youth, they set the tone for the next generation. So we are responsible and required to use the gifts and the skill sets and the practicing and the expertise that God has given us in this life to really cater to the youth, because we've been youth as well. And we've all been exposed to a lot of beautiful and crazy things that a lot of times when you become adults, if you think about maybe substance abuse or unhealthy habits or things like that, there's a lot of things in your youth that a lot of adults don't heal from. So if I could keep it in the same space, but kind of touch a little bit on this as well, you being a man of color, um, I want to ask you a question in regards to trauma. When teaching and coaching the youth and your students, and the athletes that you have had the blessing to do that with, what, if you share in terms of trauma, what is the advice that you would like to share with the youth in terms of how to process trauma versus deal with trauma?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It depends, it changes. So, for example, I teach middle school, but I coach high school. I coach, varsity level high school guys. And I can say that although they're, for the most part, and a lot of times they're experiencing kind of the same things, where they're at on that spectrum is where the difference lies, So with my varsity guys, for example, I can share or draw from personal experiences and have some real conversations, and be vulnerable and share some things that they can relate to right then and there in that moment. It's a little bit different, with a 12-year-old, right? Um, so as far as, how to best deal with it, it's tough because you have to meet people where they are.
Yeah.
We have some young people, the fact that therapy and mental health, these are all things that they might not be commonplace within our community yet, but at least the concepts, the words, the phrases, they're not new. I can honestly say that when I was in middle school, when I was in high school, mental health was it wasn't a thing. It wasn't a phrase, there wasn't a term. It wasn't something that was talked about. Whereas for the most part, just about every 17-year-old has an idea of what mental health is, what it means, why it's important, why it's a thing. That wasn't the case when I was 17. You know what I mean? So when you don't have labels and you don't have definitions, you can't define these things that you might be dealing with or that are important, what I mean, in your life. If you're not able to define it, it's very difficult to have an idea of where to start. I think that that's a beautiful thing that we've made at least that level of progress. We obviously have so much farther to go, but they're all in different places. There are some of my youngsters who are very familiar with therapy. They've done therapy sessions before. It's not necessarily a taboo thing to them. It's not even like this difficult thing to talk about. But then there are others where, they still are dealing with that, based on their circumstances, their family situation, et cetera, et cetera. It might not be a thing. It's not something that they're necessarily cool with. And so I think it can be damaging. Just to kind of segue a little bit, when we look at like our broader community, a lot of times we motivate or we attempt to motivate through shame. And even though, I think we have a pretty good idea to understand that that doesn't work, it's not the best practice, but it's what we know. And so it's what we do. So because mental health is like more of a popular thing now, and therapy may not necessarily be popular within the community, but people know what therapy is. Not everybody know that it's available to them. They might not be aware of their resources, but they know that it's a thing. People get it. Whether or not I'm going to get it, that's a whole different story. A lot of times with our broader community, we try to motivate through shame. Like, oh, that's the problem with the Black community. We think therapy is weak. We think it's this. We think it's that. And that's the problem. That's the problem. That's the problem. Well, shaming everybody isn't necessarily going to help them get to that point that they need to get to. So if I have a young person who feels that way, I'm not going to tear them down about how they feel about it. They got there for a reason. All behaviors are learned behaviors. And trying to make somebody feel bad about what they think or what they may feel, is real, that's not going to help them elevate to some type of higher level of consciousness. So I really just try to meet them where they're at, depending on, I take each situation uniquely. And my thing is like, okay, well, let me educate you. What do you know? What don't you know? What questions do you have? How do you feel? And I want to know just so I can better know you, not to tell you that one stance is wrong and the other one is right, or one stance is better than the other. Understanding goes a long way. It establishes middle ground, and it gives us an opportunity to really be able to communicate. We can't communicate if we're on different planes. We can't communicate effectively if we're on different planes. So me giving a person the opportunity to talk freely about where they are, who they are, and how they feel, that gives me the opportunity to understand them. And if I can understand you, well, then now I can kind of meet you where we are, and we can have an opportunity to communicate effectively. I think that it's very important for me to always remember that my role is to inform. And then I have to give you the space to do what you will with that information, to process that information in your own time. If we all think about it, there's a lot of lessons, things that we hold near and dear to at this point in our lives. But if we think about it, somebody's been trying to teach us that lesson for some time, you know what I mean? And we might not have accepted it the first time we got it. That doesn't mean it wasn't necessary, So it's a blessing that somebody takes the time out to inform you, to try to educate you on something. Even if you're not open to it in that moment, you have that seed planted. And when you are ready, you'll be able to be open up to it. You can bloom whenever your season is. And it's not for me to judge when somebody's correct season is, So that's really the biggest thing. And it's crazy because as important as that is for like my varsity guys between the ages of 15 to 18, it's equally important, if not more important sometimes for, our younger kids. Kids are evolving way faster than they used to. The caveat there is that I might be exposed to a lot more at an earlier age. That doesn't mean I necessarily understand everything, or that I've processed it correctly, or that I even have the maturity to deal with these things properly. But I know about them. I can tell you certain things about them. I've experienced certain things, et cetera, et cetera. So for our younger people, they're really in a delicate space. And a lot of times they just get met with a lot of judgment. You know what I mean? You like to talk about how kids these days are this and kids these days are that. They're disrespectful. They're lazy. They're all these labels that we put on them. But again, like all these behaviors are learned behaviors. Yeah. So if these things are true, we have to look at ourselves because we're the ones that they got it from, in some way, shape, or form. And it's very important. I feel like our young ones, they need that understanding the most. They need that grace the most. They need that time, that patience the most. And so, when you're younger, at 16, 17, 18, you think you know everything. You think you're ready for the world. You usually don't know much. However, you're big enough physically, and you're in a space in life where in some way, shape, or form, people may have to listen, depending on how you respond to certain things. People may be forced to listen, either because your stature is big enough or your voice is deep enough. For our young ladies, that mature physically very fast, a lot of times, somebody's going to have to take some type of attention to you just because of how you look. But for our younger ones, 11, 12, 13 years old, it's very easy to be dismissive of them. You know, you're just a
Yeah.
baby, you're just a child, you don't know anything. And at that age, when you've been exposed to a ton, you have ideas, you
Mm.
have thoughts, you have feelings, you have questions, um, you have strong opinions about things, but people are dismissive of what you have to say. People are dismissive of what you think. I know that at that age, it's very, they're not going to keep trying. You know, once they see that, oh, okay, that's how you feel, they're just going to hold that stuff in and they're going to go to whoever, they're only going to share it with whoever's receptive of it. That's one of the reasons why um, the streets is always like a difficult thing for us to combat as a community,
Mm.
because the street is the only place that's willing to accept you just how you are, at least in the
Mhm.
beginning. You know,
Right.
after you get knee deep, that's when you find out that, oh, there's, you know, there's traps, there's rules, I
Mm.
have to live up to certain things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But in the beginning, the street is always going to accept you. It's going to accept you with open arms, just the way you are. And those of us that claim to love our young people, we're not always that accepting. We're not always that open. We can often be dismissive, sometimes knowingly and a lot of times unknowingly. So that's really just, you know, for me, that's the most important thing, is giving them the space to get their stuff off and then making sure that they feel validated, regardless of whether I agree with you or not. You know, you could be saying things that are ridiculous, but you're a human being and you're having a human experience, you know, and that's valid. And it's important for them to feel validated in that. If they can't feel validated in their own voice, why would they ever share it, you know? And if they don't share it, that's usually when, you know, what leads to a lot of issues down the road.
I agree. Youth is so powerful, and you really touched um, so many points, but you highlighted so many areas that, I'm sure we kind of felt that way when we were younger, kind of being overlooked a little bit, or we're being judged or analyzed based on our physical features when obviously life is so much deeper than that. But, like you said, learned behavior is learned behavior. People don't just, things don't fall out of the sky. Like there's culture, some type of tradition, some paper trail. So if I can shift just a little bit in terms of that, kind of saying the area in regards to, I would say youth, but personal development, because it's not something that stops. Even when you get into your 70s or 80s, as a human, we never stop learning. And that's a blessing that in this lifetime, we don't realize, when you have a bunch of um, accolades and different things that is highlighted, whether it's you get your masters or different things like that. um Learning and understanding how to process the perspective outside of a perspective that you're familiar with, especially teaching an adult that, but youth that is super important because children get very influenced very quickly, and adults too, but primarily children, especially within the ages of where you teach and coach for men and for women. So if I could actually ask a question in regards to that, it's a little bit out, but kind of in the topic. I do want to pick your brain a little bit when it comes to manhood. Obviously, with you being an adult, you've had the experiences that you've had, and it's very powerful that you're teaching and coaching the youth, which I'm sure is men and young women. So, in terms of manhood, regarding you being a coach and regarding you being a teacher, what message would you like to share with those that are viewing this segment in regards to manhood? How would you use the word manhood to teach the youth?
Manhood is it's extremely important to me. It's interesting because it's like I think about it a lot, but then again, I don't. You know what I mean? If that makes sense. Like, I'm the youngest of five children. I have two older brothers. I was blessed to have, you know, both parents in the household throughout. I was shown what that looks like from a very early age. You know, I was able to watch and observe my father. My brothers were very hands on with me. Um, there are a lot of things that they just didn't let slide, and, you being a fellow Nigerian, I'm sure you can attest, that's a part of our culture. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to carry yourself a certain way. You're going to handle things a certain way. And I got to give my brothers a lot of credit, because oftentimes, because that's a culture thing, you might learn to just do it when the right people are watching, but then when you're with other people, when in Rome, you're going to do as the Romans do. My brothers, weren't about that. They were very keen on me being a certain way wherever I go, no matter who I'm around, no matter who I'm in front of. There are just certain things you're supposed to do. There's the basics. I think every man tries to teach, whether his son or any young boy. Look a man in the eye when they talk to you, give a firm handshake, those types of things. But then there's others, being accountable, being honest, being able to stand on your truth, even if it's not popular. Having dignity, having integrity, moving with integrity. These are things that to me are synonymous, and these are the foundations of manhood. So when I'm working particularly in it, yeah, it's equally important with my high school guys to my middle schoolers. It's a huge deal. It usually just shows itself in different ways. And again, it's very, very important to try to stay in the lane of educating and not judging, and it's hard. It's difficult.
Yeah.
There's certain things that are just counter to who I am as a man, period. And so if I see it, I'm personally bothered by it, and so when I correct it, you'll probably, that piece is going to come out, and that's something that I try to work on. But it's extremely important. The integrity piece, the accountability, those are probably the two main pillars for me. Whatever you do, you have to do it with integrity, and whatever you do, you have to be accountable for. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And so naturally, that's not something that comes natural to a 12-year-old. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to fight that. Just like responsibility isn't something that comes natural to a child, You'll fight it unless you've been put in a position where you had to be responsible for more than yourself from an early age. Then it might not seem so strange, But if that's not the case, discipline is strange to a young person. All young people fight discipline in the beginning. They need it, they yearn for it, but they don't necessarily know how to receive it, That's part of our job, is teaching them how to receive it, so that they also know how to go out in the world and show it. So yeah, that's I would say that those are the two main things: integrity and accountability. We're in the digital age with the internet and social media. Everybody wants to film everything. An argument pops off, people start fighting, people got their phones, somebody's gonna grab their phone and film it. It's a big no for me. And those types of things, I'm really big and hands on with my students. But that's something that is like a common thing with like middle schoolers. Whereas when I take my athletes, for example, I'm in the business of getting my players into college, where we coach and we play at a high level. And so all of my student athletes are playing for scholarships. Well, if you're blessed enough to be recruited and be recruited by multiple people, there's a certain way you have to go about that. There's a certain way you have to move. At certain points, you can only choose one, right? You can't choose everybody. But that process of elimination still has to be handled with integrity. Just ghosting people, that's not how a man handles himself. And so these are the things that we try to say. Those are just two examples that, show the difference in my 17-year-olds versus my 12-year-olds, right? The type of things that we have to talk about and deal with. But at the end of the day, the principle is still the same. Move with integrity and be accountable for how you move. It doesn't mean you're going to be perfect. You're going to make mistakes, but own those, stand on them. it's a lot easier to move past that, you know, if and when you do. When you're constantly running from things, you're gonna have to constantly run back into them. You know what I mean? So that's what I would say on that.
You touched some extremely, extremely necessary points. We really appreciate you sharing that. I know there's going to be a lot of men listening to this as well as women, and integrity and accountability are two very necessary and powerful words. I would say in that order, but also alphabetically accountability. As a man and also as a woman, speaking from a woman's perspective, accountability as a human being is extremely important. It's really the foundation of humility. You got to humble yourself because God in life will humble you if you
But
don't. And especially, you learn this best in your youth. And it's important that we learn how to educate, teach, and coach the youth the importance of ownership when it comes to accountability and responsibility. And we appreciate you touching bases on that because, especially as a man, like you said, stand on it. It's not about perfection. I mean, as much as we use words like perfect and normal, they're not particularly the proper words to use because the thing about being a human is development is in our DNA. We just don't always process it because we're influenced by so many different layers in this lifetime. So when you understand words like accountability, when you understand the importance of integrity and learning how to be intentional, it changes the dynamic of your mindset. It changes your attitude, your mood. It changes the way you think and process and live your lives. And especially with a lot of crazy things in general in life, but within the last couple of years that, our youth has been exposed to, um, accountability is extremely important and integrity. That's something that, as you said, these are things that are taught to us in our culture. So I have about two questions left. And again, we appreciate you being here. You're touching so many points. This is not something that's just for the youth, but it does start with the youth. We don't just there's a reason why God says, children of God and not adults of God. We're all children at the end of the day. And, there's parts of and layers of our youth that like follows us into our adulthood. And depending on what it is, it can kind of make or break a lot of things that you're called to do. So my next question for you is, um, of course, you touched bases on, being Nigerian, and shout out to all the Nigerians. It's a lot of us everywhere, but shout out to them. um, so in regards to the word culture, what would you like to share as far as what you've been exposed to and how you believe culture coming from a Nigerian background has helped shape you today?
I mean, man, it's a lot. It's a lot. I'll say one. I can't say it's the most important, but I know that it. I think about it often. Order is extremely important in our culture.
Oh yeah.
Everybody really in the entire community, but that's just if we're just talking about the family unit. Each person within the family unit has a role, and within that role, you have a job, you have responsibilities. Your job or your responsibilities are defined by the role that you play. Now, is it always positive? No, and you know what I mean. You can attest that's with any culture comes some foolishness, and
Mm.
that foolishness gets reinforced by the fact that it's part of our culture, and that's the part that you talked about developing being in our DNA. That's the part that it's incumbent upon us as we grow and as we evolve to change and fix those things. However, for me, why that aspect of our culture is so important is that like you learn at an early age that everything isn't for everybody. You know, there are certain things that some people can do that you can't. And is it fair? No. Is it real? Absolutely. And that order is so important because we cannot thrive as a unit if everybody does not play their part. You know, so are you capable of doing anything and doing whatever you want to do? Sure, you're capable. Is that how we're going to do things? No, absolutely not. You know what I mean? Because it's paramount that everybody does what is necessary of them. It's not that you can't do anything beyond that. However, you must do what's necessary of you if we are going to be able to move forward successfully and effectively. And I think that's I find myself coming back to that a lot in adulthood. It wasn't necessarily explained that way. You get it? I can't even really remember if it was ever explained at all. You know what I mean? No. Things aren't really explained. You know, you receive instruction and you carry it out. If not, you deal with the consequences for it. However, in adulthood, you're able to understand the advantages that you gained as a result of it. You know, in this day and age, and it's difficult because depending on who you are, where you come from, and what your experiences are or have been, you might have a very different relationship with that. You know, something I said may really get under some people's skin. It might even offend some because maybe in your culture, the fact that you were shoved into this role limited you a ton. Maybe it quieted you. Maybe it silenced you. Maybe it silenced you about trauma, you know what I mean? And really negative experiences that you should have been able to speak about. Maybe it silenced people that were supposed to help you, people that were supposed to protect you, you know? And these are real things. So it's difficult because it can be a double-edged sword. But we're living in it gets dangerous. We're living in serious times, and like I'll take something as simple as euphemism as simple as like I said what I said, right? Very popular phrase. And I understand, I think the root of it. I don't think everybody understands the reach of it. You know, people sometimes hide behind sentiments like that because it gives you the opportunity to relinquish accountability. You get what I'm saying? This idea that, you know, well, I'm only responsible for what I said and not what you understand. It's not necessarily true. You know, the number one, the first rule of communication, it is incumbent upon the communicator to make sure that they communicate in a way that is effective to the target audience. That is your responsibility, you know? So just using that small example, we live in a world today that constantly promotes this idea that, you know, do whatever you want to do, be however you want to be, embark on anything as long as it makes you happy, as long as you're cool with that, you know. And it's like, that's not necessarily true, you know what I mean? Because, and we see it every day, some of the things that make certain individuals happy, you know, murder others, you know what I mean? Some of the things that make certain individuals happy castrate others. Some of the things that make individuals happy imprison others, you know? And so the idea that, hey, you know, as long as you're good, then that's all that matters. It relinquishes a lot of responsibility from folks for their actions. And so that's the part that makes me uncomfortable with the popularity of those types of sentiments, especially today. Because again, I think I understand why it started, you know what I mean? The root of those things, but the reach extends a lot farther, and nobody's there left holding that bag. Nobody's there to try and correct that and get everybody back on board. It's just, it gets put out there and the masses get to do with it what they will. And so again, that's why to me it's so important. Like, we got to grab hold of our young people. You know what I mean? It's incumbent upon us, if we're going to let the world raise them, if we're going to let the world teach them, we can't be upset when they behave in a worldly manner. You know what I mean? If you want them to behave in a manner that's specific to the ideals that you have then you have to be intentional about that. You know what I mean? Going back to what you said in terms of intentionality. And so, it's culture is culture is super layered. You know what I mean? We could talk all night about culture. And I'm not trying to be evasive or run from the aspects of culture that are not beneficial, the aspects of culture that are even damaging. I am not trying to run from that at all. But I also don't want to, I'm not going to pigeonhole it either. You know what I mean? That's not something that's just specific to Nigerians. That's not something that's just specific to Africans. That's not something that's just specific to Black people. That is true of all human beings. It's true of the human condition. When you establish culture, unfortunately, the good things about establishing culture is that everybody gets on one accord and should be moving towards one thing. The bad part about culture is that it can pull a blanket sometimes over unintended behaviors and unintended uses. Anything in the wrong hands becomes dangerous. You know what I'm saying? And so, again, that's when it's incumbent upon us as we grow, as we develop, as we evolve. We have to constantly also be evolving our systems. We have to evolve our culture. We have to evolve everything that we hold near and dear to us, because the world is moving. You know what I mean? The world is evolving, and eventually, even if it started out as good, eventually it will become outdated and start to do some bad.
Yeah. No, we definitely appreciate just everything that you touch basis on, because these are very necessary conversations that I'm sure we're having, but it gets overshadowed by things that really don't matter. These are things that we do need to be holding ourselves accountable for, whether we're parents or not. I think that's also something that's important too. You and I, I'm sure, know a lot of amazing parents. Shout out to them as well. And there's a lot of people that aren't parents, but we still have a responsibility to the people, to the youth, to the children that are at some point going to be in our positions, showing the next generation behind them, hey, this is what it is. We got to set the tone. So I appreciate you sharing that, because culture is important. Like you said, it's not the highlight of everything, but there are things that teach us how to operate and more effectively. And that's all that matters. So before we close out our segment, my final question before we close out, if you could just give us a simple statement using the word purpose, what would it be?
Find it. Find it. Matter of fact, I'm sorry, but I read something literally just the other day that was profound, in my opinion, on the topic of purpose. And I want to make sure I do not, I want to make sure I don't misquote it. Finding your purpose is so critical to life. Walking in it is the purpose of life, in my opinion. You know what I mean? Like, we're here to find it, and that's not anyone else's responsibility but yours. I think every human being at some point has asked, what's the meaning of life? What's the purpose of this? Why am I here? It's a good question.